So what we're going to do over the next few minutes, very briefly, I'm going to revise over the Aqidah of some of the deviant groups that were covered in this course. As a bonus, for those of you who showed up for this revision class, I'm also going to cover some of the more deviant groups that came about recently, contemporary deviant groups that were not covered in the course. So these are groups that came about perhaps after the course was put together initially in terms of its content, or they weren't as big a deal when the course started as they are now. So I'll cover them at the end, inshallah. So in this course, we looked at the beliefs of Muslims who went astray. Some who went so far astray that they're not regarded as Muslims anymore. Others who are still regarded as Muslims but deviants. And we covered a variety of different groups in this course, starting off, of course, with the first two deviations, that the ones that occurred in the first century of Islam. We studied the Aqidah and the history of the Shia and the Khawarij. Right, so the Shia and the Khawarij were the first deviant sect to pop up in Islamic history. At the time of the civil war between the Sahaba, when Ali radiallahu anhu and Muawiyah radiallahu anhu were at war with each other, a group came about that disassociated themselves from both teams of the Sahaba, declaring them to be kuffar or disbelievers and fighting against them. This group became known as the Khawarij, and they eventually assassinated Ali radiallahu anhu. The Khawarij as a group with that exact same beliefs no longer exists. As a mentality and a mindset, they exist in every era. So in every era, you will find a group of people who make takfir of the rulers, they declare the rulers and other Muslims to be kafir, and they fight them and they kill them. This is called the Khawarij mentality. So the Khawarij as a group did not last throughout the centuries, but as a mindset and a mentality they did, and they continue to pop up every generation. So for example, the jihadist movements of the 21st century are Khawarij in their mentality. The second deviant group to come about in our history were the Shia. So again, with the split between Ali and Muawiyah radiallahu anhuma in the battle of Siffin, a group became pro-Ali in the sense that they felt that the family of Ali should have the full rights to the rulership of the Ummah. This became stronger during the time of the Umayyads. The Umayyads were the family of Muawiyah, initially his descendants, after he passed on to his cousins and their descendants. And so a political group came about that believed that leadership should be with the descendants of Ali and not the Umayyads. Over the centuries, that political group developed their own aqidah, their own beliefs, their own sources of hadith, and they essentially became one of the largest deviant sects in Islam, which is the Shia, the Isna Ashariya Shia specifically. Throughout this course, we looked at the various different types of Shia. So we learned about the 12ers, the Ismailis, the Druze, the Assassins, the Zaydis, various types of Shia that exist. The most popular type are the Isna Ashariya, those who believe in the 12 Imams concept. Now, it is my opinion that Isna Ashariya Shia are still Muslim. Now, I know that opinion is controversial to some people, but I do not regard them as outside the fold of Islam. I regard them as a deviant sect, but still Muslim. Right? A deviant sect, but still Muslim, particularly the layman amongst them. The ulama amongst them, that's more doubtful. But the layman amongst the Shia, someone who is raised in Iran, that's all they know, that's all they've been taught. They believe in La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, they believe in the 5 pillars of Islam, but they are Shia in their approach towards the Sahaba and the Imams. I believe they are deviant, but still Muslim. I think it's important to make that clarification, because there's a lot of extremism that pops up in our communities nowadays towards the Shia that needs to be quelled. We need to be more understanding and compassionate in our da'wah towards them, not hostile and violent. That doesn't solve any of the problems. A more deviant Shia group than them were the Ismailis, right? And the Ismailis at one point in time ruled the Muslim nation in Egypt. Okay, they were the rulers of Egypt and the surrounding areas. The Fatimid dynasty were Ismaili, and they oppressed the Sunni Muslims of that area. The Ismailis' beliefs are very far away from Islam, to such an extent that the majority of ulama regard them as outside the fold of Islam. The third major group to come about in our history that didn't last, but they had a lasting impact on the Ummah, were the Mu'tazilites. So in the time of the Abbasid Khilafat, during the translation movement, the time when the golden age of Islamic science, when the Muslims were translating the various books of other nations into Arabic, they also translated the books of the Greek philosophers, and they began to study the books of the Greek philosophers, and this had an impact on their Aqidah. So they began to reinterpret their Aqidah according to Greek philosophy, and this became known as the Mu'tazilite fitna. And the Abbasid Khalifas, about 3 or 4 of them in total, adopted this Aqidah and tried to enforce it upon the Ummah, but they failed to do so. So the Mu'tazilites, although they died out, they did have a lasting impact on the Ummah, in the sense that some of their beliefs became mainstream. Right? So some of the beliefs found their way into mainstream Islam, and really the majority of Muslims still actually have some of those beliefs today. Although they're not the main ones, right? But they still beliefs that were not there before the Mu'tazilite fitna started. The Mu'tazilites are Muslims; they're not outside the fold of Islam, but they are deviants nonetheless. Looking at a few groups that are not Muslim, a few groups whose Aqidah is so far-fetched that they are not Muslims. You cannot regard them as Muslims in any sense of the word. Particularly those groups that follow false prophets. Right? Those groups that follow false prophets are not Muslim by definition. Right? Even if they call themselves Muslim. This is not extremism. This is not violent. This is not being harsh. This is simply stating the facts. One of the conditions to be Muslim is to believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the final messenger of Allah. So anyone who believes and follows in a false prophet that came after him is not a Muslim by definition. This includes the Ahmadis, also known as the Qadianis, the Nation of Islam, the Rashidis, the followers of Rashad Khalifa, also known as the Baha'is. All of these different groups follow false prophets. Because they follow false prophets, that takes them out of the fold of Islam. So it's very important that we differentiate between those groups that are deviant and those groups that are outside the fold of Islam. These are two separate types of sects in Islam. A group that is deviant is still a Muslim. Allah can still forgive them. Allah can still accept the deeds. A group that is outside the fold of Islam does not have any of the legit rights of Muslims in this world, and on the Day of Judgment they're going to have a much tougher time, because they're basically following a false religion, right? So following something like Qadianism, the Ahmadis or the Baha'is, it's the same thing like following Christianity or Judaism. It's following a religion that is false, even if there are elements of truth in it, right? So going back towards those groups that are still considered within the fold of Islam, even though they may have mistakes, we come to the final group in this revision, and that is the Sufis. And here too, I would warn you not to group all Sufis together, because Sufi is a very general label that refers to someone who has taken a more spiritual and mystical approach to Islam. And it covers a wide variety of groups like the Deobandis, the Barelvis, the Naqshbandis, the Chistis, and many other groups fall under the category of Sufi. It's not one group. And from these groups, they fall under the category of Sufi. Some of them are closer to the Sunnah, some of them are further away from the Sunnah, and some of them are far away from the Sunnah. So we can't put them all together as one group. Rather, you need to deal with them individually. Some people who are of Sufi inclinations are extremely pious, very close to Allah, and may have some mild deviations. while there are others amongst them who have gone far, far away and basically fallen into a cult of saint worship. So, the big problem that the scholars of Aqidah have with Sufism is in the innovation of ways of worshipping Allah and the development of spiritual paths that are not from the Sunnah. And these two are put together in the concept of the tariqah, right? Where they follow a tariqah, a spiritual path with a spiritual leader, where they're given acts to worship to do which is not from the Sunnah. And this becomes very controversial because if you go with the more mainstream understanding of bid'ah, these groups have fallen into bid'ah. Now, so falling into bid'ah does not take a person out of the fold of Islam. Nonetheless, it is deviation, it is a major problem. Alright, so these are some of the groups that we covered during this course. As a bonus for those of you who showed up for this class, I also want to cover some of the groups not covered in this course. The contemporary problems, right? The dangers to our time, which we did not get a chance to cover in this course. 4 of them in particular I want to focus on. These are 4 groups that have become very problematic in our times. The first is the jihadist movement, which started, you'd say, in the 1960s. So this is a new deviant sect that popped up less than 100 years ago. They didn't exist 100 years ago. The jihadists are basically a reaction to the downfall of the Khilafat and the tyranny that is has become very common in the Muslim world. So in World War I, the Muslims lost the Khilafat. The Muslim world broke up into a variety of different groups and sects, different countries and states, and many of these countries and states have oppressive rulers. As a reaction to these rulers, political activism became more rife amongst the Muslims who were fighting these rulers. And when these political activists were imprisoned, tortured, executed, assassinated, this pushed people even further and made people become even more extreme, and that led to this contemporary jihadist movement coming about in the 1960s. This movement, we can say they are the modern day Khawarij, right? In the sense that they make takfir of any Muslim that's not part of their group. Any Muslim that's not part of the group, they call him a kafir. They have no problem spilling the blood of Muslims. We've seen them bombing masjids. We've seen them, blowing up places full of Muslims. They do all this in the name of jihad. They've essentially taken one part of the religion, jihad, completely twisted its fiqh and its conditions and the aqidah surrounding it, and blown it out of proportion and made it the entire religion. And they've used it as a justification for widespread bloodshed and murder. And they really are one of the biggest problems of our time. And a lot of young people get caught up in this movement because of their frustration with the governments in the Muslim world. So it's very important that we understand the roots of this group, the deviations, and that we're able to explain it to youngsters to protect them from falling into these groups. The second type of problem that's popped up in recent times, a new deviant sect, is the liberals or the modernists. So this is the opposite extreme. The jihadists on one extreme are killing Muslims and declaring people kafir and all of this. On the other extreme, we have many Muslims, particularly in the United States of America, but also in other parts of the world as well, who want to reinterpret Islam according to Western values. And so they begin to reject agreed upon parts of the Sharia. Now this actually started about 200 years ago with Muhammad Abduh in Egypt. Right? He was the Mufti of Egypt at that time. He can be considered the father of liberal Islam. Right? His ideas led way to other people following in his footsteps. So the liberals and modernists are people who, for example, they don't believe that homosexuality is a sin. They don't believe that drinking alcohol is a sin. They don't believe women need to wear hijab. Some of them don't believe you have to pray 5 times a day. Essentially anything that goes against the West's understanding of Islam, they reject it. Or rather the West's understanding of what's good and evil, they reject it. And they try to twist Islam to suit the Western ideology of good and evil. This group is on the verge of kufr. In fact, some of them are flat out outside the fold of Islam with the stuff they say. It's a very dangerous movement. And it's become very popular amongst young people in the United States of America. uh, and in other parts of the world, because there's a lot of push for this from Western media. They put these people on a pedestal and they give them platforms to speak and they publish their books, and essentially this is their version of Islam being pushed out by the enemies of Islam. Linked to them is the hadith rejectors. So hadith rejection, essentially these are Muslims who believe that hadith is not important or hadith is not authentic and you must just follow the Quran. And also they have their roots in the teachings of the non-Muslims. Essentially it was the Orientalists who came up with these ideas of hadith not being preserved, hadiths not being authentic, and some Muslims bought into their arguments and started following it. And so now we have amongst young people nowadays, not even just young people, but you have amongst Muslims who try to form their own understanding of Islam, a lot of hadith rejectors. A lot of liberals are hadith rejectors, a lot of other people are also hadith rejectors as well. Essentially, once people reject hadith, they can just make up their own understanding of Islam, because 3/4 of our fiqh comes from hadith. The final form of contemporary deviation that has popped up in recent times, and this is a major fitna that's affecting Muslims across the globe, is feminism. Right, so this can be considered part of liberalism, but more specifically focused on issues related to women. So feminism is the idea that men and women are completely equal and the same in every way, and there should be no such thing as gender roles. Right, at least this is what it's become. I mean, there are other forms of feminism as well, but this is really the one that's being pushed. So feminist Muslims, for example, don't believe in the traditional husband-wife roles that Islam teaches. They don't believe in hijab. They don't believe in the prohibition of zina, in the prohibition of lesbianism. Again, I know I'm generalizing here. There's many different types of feminism amongst Muslims, but I'm talking about the type that's being pushed by Western media, right? The ones that's being forced upon people and the ones that a lot of youngsters are buying into. Feminism has destroyed marriages. If you don't believe me, look at these divorce statistics of today compared to 100 years ago. Look at the amount of young people who don't ever want to get married and prefer living a life of zina today compared to 100 years ago. The Muslim Ummah has been really wrecked by this feminist fitna. A lot of people are caught up in it, and